Good morning, guys, and welcome to this JavaScript marathon training. My name is Simone, and I'm a senior engineer at Labs. You can find me on Twitter using the hashtag at the bottom of the screen, Zelig8880, and do not hesitate to get me in touch with me either through social media or in the chat, as I will be looking at the chat as we go through the session today. Before we start, it's time to thank our sponsor, as we couldn't do this without them. Our first sponsor today is Labs, your partner in modern digital transformation. We specialize in mentorship, consulting, training, and staff augmentation for enterprise organization. Find out more at labs.com or send us an email at hi@labs. Do you find keeping up with constant evolving technology struggle? And do you want to bring up your team up to speed on one of the latest technologies? Labs offers personalized training programs to suit your organizational needs, ensuring you and your company stay on the leading edge. Contact us at hi@dis.co to set up your complimentary needs assessment. Lastly, I would like to remind everyone that every month, on the third Thursday of every month, we actually do a Vue meetup online. Last week was with Evan Yu, where they released the Vue 3.0 beta. So they're very nice meetup, and we also got fantastic speakers coming along. So either if you want to call to be a speaker, you want to submit your call for paper, or if you want to come around, just go to vuemeetup.com. Today we're going through the learning unit test using Vue.js. So if you've never done unit testing before, this should provide you enough information to actually start and do unit testing. I will cover what is important to unit test and what is not, and I will also try to give you as many details as I can. Unit testing is a very big subject as itself. So we're not going to go through the normal unit testing and end-to-end testing and snapshot testing. We're just going to focus on Vue itself. I also want to remind everyone that we've been doing this almost every week for the last 4 weeks now, since April, and there is already 3 more sessions recorded that if you would like to go them and you would like to learn more about Vue if you missed them. The first one was about learning how to do Vue.js, so we wrote up a little blog post that is the repository that we're actually going to use today. Then the second one was about Vuex. So we learned how to use Vuex, when to use Vuex, and what were the gotcha and pros and cons of using it. And then last week we covered the PWA. So we started and we created a PWA from scratch, and I showed how to implement different endpoints and what actually that means to implement the PWA. The actual playlist is right here, and I'm going to add it there in the comment. And it's now time to actually go and start our session today. So as I mentioned before, we're going to do unit testing, and we're going to do it in Vue. Luckily for you guys, unit testing provided by Vue is quite simple because you have a wrapper called vue-test-util that actually supports you in actually writing up the tests and in analyzing the component itself. Before we actually start in the nitty-gritty and start in the implementation details, let's have a chat about what is actually unit test. When you write an application, you write many parts. So you got the UI, you got the screens, you got sometimes a form that need to go up and down, you got some validation within the form, and you do have some method that sometimes need to maybe they may have to show a little pop-up if something goes wrong, or they actually need to show a success email. All those features are great, and I suggest you to still write them and make your website or application as complex as possible, but they're very hard to test manually every time. So you may want to do a refactor, or you may want to actually do an upgrade, or you may just want to work on the website. And you would like to go to sleep in the evening without being restless or without thinking that you've broken something. And relying just on manual testing, that is very important. So I don't say that you should remove manual testing, but it's nice sometimes to have a different kind of testing that will support you in actually have nice and sweet dreams in the night. There are different kinds of testing. So there is unit test, there is component testing, I think, is what we're actually going to do today. There's no real name, but people call it component testing because we're going to test the Vue components. Then you go integration test. Integration test is when you actually got different units and you actually test the end-to-end of the different units. So when you do unit test, you usually test just one unit. So if you have a file called access or a file called logger, you will just test that if you call that, it's expected to log. With integration test, it's a bit different, because if you got a component, they call something they call the logger, you test the whole flows, So you test the connection between different units. And then we do have end-to-end testing that in recent time is becoming very popular. They can either be the one done with Cypress, that is a very simple tool to use. So I don't know if you never heard of Cypress.io, but it's very, I would really greatly suggest you to start and get used to it. End-to-end testing is usually used to cover the very basic end-to-end. So you start, you create a user clicks somewhere, and you can just replicate all the clicking and all the steps that the user may actually do on your website. And it's a great tool, a fantastic tool that I suggest you to implement. Lastly, we also got visual testing now. This is it done with ApplyTools? I think is one of the application providing you visual testing, where what they actually do, they create snapshot, actual images of your site or your application, and those snapshots and they're compared as you do the release. So I'll give you an example. You may do a change in the CSS where you want to change a button down, you want to change a style. The snapshot testing will go through each page, will test them all, and say, hey, just so you know, this page is different. Is that what you expected? And sometimes you may actually find very interesting errors, or you may actually solve interesting bugs by implementing them. So as I mentioned, it's quite a wide and a broad topic. We're not going to be able to cover it all. And also, depending from your application, you may want to do one or the other. So you don't actually always implement them all in one project. And sometimes it's either because of time or it's because of project structure. I worked in the past in projects where they were too complex behind the scene and the code was too legacy and too embedded between each other to actually do unit testing. So we were forced to do just end-to-end testing on the front end. When the benefits of writing unit tests is not just to go and have very nice slips because that your code is actually tested, but doing unit tests also helps and supports you to actually write better code. The main reason for it is because you will start to actually split up your code you will actually make your code simpler, because as you will see from testing today, when you do unit tests, you expect one action. I actually wrote it down. You expect just something. Given something, you will have an output. So if I press the button, I will see a pop-up, or if I go back, I will go to the back page. So because you will start to get this in mind, your file will start to get simpler, and your method will actually start to get thinner and smaller. Because if you do unit testing, you got that in mind. Even if you don't actually write unit testing in all your project, you will see a difference in the way you actually write tests. So, the way you actually write your logical and your development on a day-to-day basis. So I really suggest you to get into unit tests, even if you just do it on your side project, because it will benefit your day-to-day as well. Now, to get started, we are going to start our Vue GUID. So I think I have a problem with the GUID almost every week. So if you don't remember how to start your GUID, you actually just need to write vue.ui, and it will actually is nothing else than is a GUI in front of the CLI. So everything we actually do in here, there's nothing else than the CLI command. So to have when you actually install a new Vue application, you're able to select that you want to add unit test, and as you do that, you will also be able to ask. You will be asked to choose which framework you actually want to work, which test runner. In our case, we're going to use Jest, and the choice is between Jest and Chai. So I like personally to use Jest. The main reason for it is because it's very, very simple to mock imports. What actually means is, we're going to go in more details later, but sometimes your file may actually have different dependencies. For example, you may include jQuery, or you may include Axios. with the Jest, you're very simply able to say, I don't really want to use the real Axios and do an API request. I want to do a fake one. And that's what a mock is. So we'll go in more details later. But again, Jest usually is the one that I choose, and Vue CLI and vue-test-util actually works on top of Jest. So it's simple to implement. To add our unit test, we go in dependencies. And we're going to add we go in plugins, apologies. We add the new plugins and we install this one at vue/cli-plugin-unit-jest. As I mentioned before, if you're actually starting a project, you don't have to do this because you're just able to select it at the start when you get asked the question. In our case, because the project is already there and running, we need to install it. So again, you just click add plugin and you do we're going to do test. You probably see. Now because I go. I don't remember the name. Vue CLI plugin unit test. Let's see if unit test actually shows. Yeah, well, so as you can see, you got we could have set up a Karma and Mocha or the Jest, and we actually went for Jest. So if I wouldn't have installed it, you would have found it here. Click it, and you were able to actually install your CLI. It's also nice to see that when you actually go a plugins, he also show you here that it's going to generate some file, and it's going to add additional feature in the UI. So in our case, after installing the Jest, if you go in tasks, you will see that there's a new task here that is task and unit. There's nothing in the configuration for ourselves. What that means that there's a new task is actually that in our package.json, if we go in the script, there's a new one called test unit. So very simply, you could do npm run test unit, and this is going to actually run our unit test framework. In our case, if I sit here, I click here, you're able to see that you're actually able to run it from the UI. And I usually like to run the test in the UI just because it's much simpler to scroll up and down and see things with more color. There are some parameters that we're going to see it later on, but at the end of the day, what I want to do is install this and click run. Now, I think I forgot some tests. Oh yes. So I do have some bare bones tests here for us to actually walk through, and we're gonna, if we have enough time, we're gonna do 5 different tests. But time will probably be limited. When you run the test, as you can see, it actually gives you a little summary. It tells you each file, what is the state of each file. So we've got 2 files, one called post.spec and one actually called create post.spec. When you want to create a new unit test, the only thing you have to do is create a file with a .spec.js. So in our case, I usually suggest you guys to create a folder in the actual root of the file called, thank you guys. I was sharing the screen. So I do apologize. So I'll go very quickly for what I showed. In the CLI, if we go in plugins, we're able to actually add plugin up here. When we actually do, if you search for unit tests, you will see that there are different unit test plugins that can actually be implemented. We went through the Jest, but we actually you can actually have the mock and Karma. I don't know about that one because they're not very common. After you add the unit test, here on the right-hand side is where I mentioned that it shows you what kind of changes the plugin will do. So this shows that it actually will add some files, and this one will show that it will add you some information widget or UI in the CLI here. In our case, we're going to go in tasks, and with the task, we're going to see that there is a new task being added that is the test.unit. The test.unit is nothing else than a script within our JSON. So if we wanted to run it, we were able to do npm run test ;unit, and it will actually run our unit test framework. As I mentioned, there are some parameters, but we're going to go through this later on. When you actually run the test, you can see that it actually gives you a little summary for each of the tests that you actually have, each of the file. So in our case, I'm telling you that this file is passing and this one is passing, and then it gives you a summary. So it says there are 2 test suites, that is the 2 files. There is 5 tests in total, and there's 0 snapshots, and there is 6 seconds of times that took to actually run the test. The reason that is actually telling that is because I do have scaffolding and bare bones of tests, but we are actually going to go through and trying to implement them all. I will actually increase the text. I will actually increase this one. So is that good for everyone, or shall I increase the bit more? I better go a bit more because the screen is not actually full. As I mentioned, of course, on top of this is actually going to add the dependencies that are required, and the Vue unit test is actually going to be a dev dependencies. Also, because at the very start I decided that my config file should be in the standalone file, a jest.config file is going to be added automatically. And in this case, the only setting that it's doing is mentioning that it wants the Vue CLI plugin unit test. Now, when you want to create new tests, there's nothing else you have to do that actually create a file called .spec.js. I was mentioning that it's nice for the tests folder to actually be within the root folder of your application. So in our case, we're in the root folder 1 hour to learn Vue. Within that, there's a folder now called test. Within that, it's usually good practice to actually add one called unit, because you may want in the future have different. For example, you may want the end-to-end, the snapshot, and everything else. So doing this will save you to have to do the move later on, that sometimes can be quite complicated or boring in Git if someone else is working on the project. I will have I got a couple of backup, and they're just files there so that we can go and see if we get stuck, or because with unit testing, no matter how long you do them, this is a personal opinion, every test actually looks different. Every test is different. Every framework they use is different, and every project I've done uses different framework. So it's one of the things where I actually get stuck. And it's just because I don't remember which way this one is to get the text and which way is this one to get the trigger. Now I'm getting much better as I'm doing more Vue tests, but there is a big mix in my head, unfortunately, due to inconsistency within the project. We got 2 files here. We got the post.spec and the create post.spec. These files, I'm going to describe you and should go you through, but as you can see there is 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 5 tests. And these are the 5 tests that are showing here. What I mean by 5 tests is when you create a test, you started by writing this, describe. So describe is, it just provides some extra information for your test. So if something will break, our UI is actually going to tell you test post.vue will render a default description, and then it says something like it failed because X, Y, and Z. So this is the way this actually works, and you can actually have a multiple describe within themselves. I usually like to do 1 file per component and 1 describe per file. So it's very simple to see that I'm actually testing just the post.vue. To actually work with Vue.js, you are going to import the component itself. So if you go in sources and we go components, we have a component called post, and then you're going to use test-utils. To start with, we're going to use the mount that allows you to actually mount a single component. So now your application starts with app.vue, and then you may have a big page and then small components within each other. The mount allows you to just take a single component and actually just mount that specific component. There is another method that is called shallow mount. Shallow mount is very similar to mount. The main difference is that when you do mount, if your component has other components within that, it will also render them. While shallow mount is it will just render 1 single line of component, and you have to pass over components if you want to. You have to pass some mocks to actually don't render the rest of the components. In our case, we're going to use the mount. And what we're actually doing now, we're going to go in the post, and we're trying to understand what actually means unit test, what we need to do with unit tests. there is a triple AAA definition for unit test. I never remember what AAA stands for. I always need to go and look up. I wrote it down this time. It's arrange, act, and assert. So what that actually means is that when you do a test, you want to arrange your data. For example, you may want to declare variables. Okay. Then you want to act, and this, for example, could be click a button or fill some text. And then you want to assert. Just you want to check expectation. What do I mean by check expectation? For example, you may want to say, I declare a variable called chow. If I click some text, if I fill up my input field, that chow should change to my name, Simone. And assert, I'm going to say, I'm checking that the input field actually has Simone within that. So the AAA usually is very good. And as you go through the AAA, this should also help you to write down the name. So when you write down the name of unit test, it should just have one action and one output. So in our case, it will render a default description if none is passed. So we're going to go through now, and we're trying to actually see what this actually means. We go back in our post. In case you don't remember this file, this was actually used last week and a couple of weeks ago. So it's just a normal, just a simple wrapper. We have HU tags with the title. We have, don't think about this for the time being, we have a possibility to actually show a short text or a description, depending from a toggle that we go down here. So when the component starts, we actually show the short text, and if people click on this button, they actually show the description. Down here, we have default description, that is actually default description in our case. Something else as well that I would like to mention is that usually I find out that I can actually write tests. If you work in a very agile environment and you go BA, they actually write user story uses the Cucumber way. Like, as a developer, I would like to do given that I've been given this, when I do this happen. You can actually use that as your test, because that will really, really help not only yourself but also your BA to test through the application, because you can make sure that what they wanted was actually defined. So in our case, we're going to check. We're going to render the default. We'll render the default description if none is passed. So what we're going to do, we're going to mount this. We're not going to pass any properties, and then we're going to check that the description loaded is actually the default description. So, okay. So arrange. First of all, we're going to mount our component. Usually people like to do something like post here and then post all the way through. The one thing that I usually suggest is to do component, is because within unit tests, you will probably see that you're going to do a lot of copy and pasting. So the main reason for the copy and paste is because you're just going to copy and paste functionality between the components. Sometimes there's a lot of scaffolding necessary, and usually actually writing down just component will help you not having to copy and paste without to have to do many changes on it. So I usually suggest it. So where we started up, we loaded up the component. So in our case, we just want to load it up, and then we want to check that default was actually the description name. Sorry, the description provided was the default one. What we have to do now is find a way to see this. Yeah. What we can do to actually get rid of get access to that, we are going to second. Okay, so we are going to get element.context. Oops. Where is it? Yes, here. So when you actually, if you see this, this is also usually called wrapper because it's wrapping the component, is a wrapper of the component. And when you actually do the click, you can see, because I got a helper here, you can see all the features supported by the wrapper. So you're able to actually trigger things such as click a button. You're able to set the value, set the prop, set the method, set the data. You can you got helpers such as the set checked that allows you to change the checked settings. You can find items and so on and so forth. Okay, so in my case, we're actually going to find an item. Okay, and the first item we're going to find is a p tag. So we go back here, we can see that we can actually find a p tag that's actually going to show the short text. It is a bit using the p tag is a bit tricky. Not tricky, it's a bit I would say it's like cheating, because I know that the p tag is going to be shown just because there is a v-if. Okay, so when this actually render, we don't have both p tag. In fact, this one is not going to be shown, and this is the only one. So if I find that p tag, is actually going to find this p tag and get in the full text. I get in the short text description. So if I go here, I can do find. If you've done JavaScript, you can actually use all the normal declaration here. So in my case, I'm just going to do a p, because as I mentioned, there will just be one p tag in our case. And then I'm going to use something else, another helper called element that is going to return the actual element. And then I'm going to use another helper called text content. So you will probably realize that all these helpers are going to save you so much time down the line. So we're going to go through the test quite quickly now. After we start all this implementation, you will see how the helper will actually support you. So the power of the vue-test-util is all this support that you actually have, ability to change properties, change data, click a button, set some text, and this is what makes this this framework even great, even better. Something that I forgot to do is usually Spec Practice when you start a test is to actually fail it first. So I'm just going to finish this and then we're going to fail it. So say for example, I'm going to say right. So what I mean by failing is when you start the test, you write your title, you get your test, and then you should actually write the expectation. In Jest, you actually write expect, and this is one of the helper of one of the Jest helper. So you expect something to be. So there are loads of helpers for Jest. So when you expect, you put what you want to actually assert. So I want to expect, and then there is loads of helpers such as to be through, to match, to be through 3, to be called. There are loads of helpers in Jest, and you're going to learn them as you actually go through this, because each of them has their own usage. So in our case, we're going to use called to match. So we want the description that is going to be in that text element to match what? And that is something that we need to define up here. So in here, we're going to define default description. So as you remember, at the start, we do the range. So see, this is where I'm going to define the default description. And my default description is going to be, it's very important that you never should test things within all the logic within the component. What you need to test is what comes in and what comes out. So in our case, we know that there's a default description because our BA told us, hey, just to let you know, if you renders, I want a default description or default picture. And we know that what the output should be these default descriptions. That's why we're actually using it. Never actually implement this by going through the actual details inside the component. Otherwise, you make your test very hard to maintain. So in my case, I'm just going to say that this description is going to be equal to match. So if I save this and we go back to our test runner, you can see that the test hasn't actually run because you need to run it manually. To help us, we can go in the parameter and actually watch for files. So this is actually going to watch for our files and it's going to rerun the test every time. I'm also wanting a notification. So if something goes wrong, I actually want to know. If I do this and actually run, our test is going to start now and it's not going to finish because there is it ran it with Vue CLI service, test unit, watch, notify. So if I go back to my test now and save it, you can see that the test actually started. Oh, better. This is magical. It actually works. I don't have to. Sorry, I was reading. Let me see something. I think probably this backup are actually affecting our test. And let's see if that's the case. It shouldn't be. Okay. So we got our test. It's going to render a function. Oh, no. Yay, something break. Okay, fantastic. So something is starting to break. I got no idea why I wasn't updating there. So something else that I've done here, guys, before you forget, is that I've added an X in front of the test. So if you want to ignore tests, and sometimes it's very useful when you want to focus on a specific text and it's not working, you can just add the X in front of it. So in our case, I added the X there and I ran this test. And if we go back to our information here, you can see that it's telling me that it was expecting a substring to be chow, but actually he had a string of default description ... Okay, so what we are actually doing is we're going back here. We're going to go and take default description, add it there, and this is actually going to okay. It's going to run again. You can see that it's failing because I wrote default description wrong, and also because it's adding the ... of the actual snippets. What you can actually realize from here, guys, is that we are we found the bug. Okay, if you realize when we loaded the post, we were shrinking the post to just 120 characters if the post was too long. But as you can see, even if the post is very small, it's adding the ... So you can realize how it's very sorry, I got a fly. Oh man, you can realize how it's very good to have unit testing because it helps you in actually making your code so much better. It's funny to realize that I'm actually realizing this right now. So it's not something I thought of, even if I did the testing before. So we're going through here. I need to change this to actually, oh, sorry. I need to change this to actually be default description ... and then I'm going to pass this not as a string, of course. It's yeah, so it's interesting to see it's interesting to see how it's important it is to actually do unit testing. So as you can see now it's running. So we got 2 running and we got 2 skipped. So we need to go back and actually see how many and to continue our things. Just to recap on this, guys, we arrange. And the first thing that we did is setting up the component and setting up the description, the one that we expect later on. We then, next one is act. So in our case, we're not actually doing anything by clicking button or anything. We're just making sure fetching the description. And lastly, we assert. We make sure that everything is fine. Now, our component, we can do something more. So in our case, we can actually pass some properties and we can make sure that those properties are actually rendered correctly. Yeah. So to actually pass the property, we're going to use a very simple layout, very simple, very similar to the one above. The only thing we're going to do something else when we mount the component. So we're going to pass properties to it. So we're going to open this down. We're going to set the component up, the post. we're going to put a comma over here and start an object because we're able to pass extra information. In our case, we're going to pass something called props data, and it's nothing else than the properties. So if you were calling your component, you were able to pass properties. Like in our case, we go back here, you can see there is a properties of title and description. Yeah. So we go in our test, and we're going to pass a title and a description, and now we're going to define them. So what I'm going to do is instead of actually write the title and description right here, I do what is usually more common, and is define them up here. And the reason for it is because we're going to use them later on in our assert down below. So we're going to do title, my title, and then description, my description. So now we got the title and description set, and we got the component mounted. So this has been our range. The next things to do now is actually assert, act. So we're not doing much different. The only thing we're going to do is actually we're going to find the p tag again. Now I would probably say that is we got the p tag for the description, and we're going to get our title. Oh, sorry, apologies. We're going to get our title, and we go back to our post, and we need to make sure that the title is an H2. There is a something else that we can improve in our test, and what this actually is the use of we shouldn't use internal implementation, as I mentioned before. And me using a p tag and me using an H2, I'm actually using internal implementation. What that means is that if tomorrow someone wants to change the p tag to be a span, or he wants to change H2 to actually be an H3, the test will break. And we may not actually want to break because it's not, the test is not testing if it's a H2. The test is actually checking if an action is actually taking place. Sorry. Let me close this one. So what we are actually going to do is to change that. Instead of use the actual elements, it's suggested usually to use data dash. So with the data dash, you're actually able to give whatever key value that you want to actually implement. So in our case, is people use test ID. Some people actually use jest if you're just using jest. Some people just say test, and some people test unit test. So the choice is yours. But the idea is that this one will actually make people realize when you write the test that this is actually tested. So that's a good thing, first of all, because you're probably going to go and change the test or run the test. And number two, you actually can change everything about it. The only thing you want to know is that you will return this information if necessary. So in our case, I'm just going to try one. Up here, I'm going to say, as I mentioned before, this is very similar to, is the same as a normal selector. So I can just run this here. Of course, not with the commenting column. So this one is going to be my title now, and this one is going to be my description. So I'm not going to go and change it all just for time reason, but we got the title and the description. Lastly, what we actually need to do is doing the assert. So we're going to expect again. We're going to expect two things at this time. We're going to check that the title, okay, to match our title. Oops, I need to change this. So this one is going to be so the actual title to be the expected title. Give more context. And then we also have the expected description to actually be equal to the actual description. I save this. I do have a pop-up coming up, but we go back here. I think I've not removed the X in front of it. So it's actually going to be ignored. So we take the X away. Okay, and one is failing. So all title is not defined. Oh yeah, because I changed it. again. Running. Oh, I forgot to actually define the component. Oh yeah. Something that I also want to point out, guys, is that the errors are fantastic. So look, must be a valid CSS selector. So straight away tells you where the issue is. You go back here. I didn't put the square bracket. Go back. And the test passes now. So I'm going to go move a bit quicker. So I want to actually answer question or give more details later on. So the next one is going to actually be using, we are going to click a button. This is going to be a bit different because we actually have something to act upon. So we need to do an action. And this is going to be a little bit more tricky. As you will see later on, we do need to wait for something. So this test is actually going to be async. So we're going to use async await. So we go back in our post, and you can see what is happening is that we're going to render the post. And then the post is going to render a full, a short description first. But then if someone will click the button, because there is a toggle text, that is a toggle text here, it's actually going to show a full description. Okay, so that's mainly what we're actually doing. So we are, we're going up here, and we're going to do kind of the same. As I mentioned before, you're probably going to copy and paste these things over and over again. So we're probably going to copy this one now. And then we're going to add a very long description. So I'm going to take a long description from up here. Okay. So this is my very long description. And then we're going to take off the title because we don't actually need it for our testing. So if there's things that you don't need, you don't have to add them to the test. The main reason for it, because if something actually breaks the title, you will have to go and change the test that didn't need actually to be changed. So we have we're loading the components and we're passing over the description. So we know that this description is actually going to be loaded because we tested that above here. And what we have to do now, we have to click the button. How do we click the button? Again, we have a very good helper. So from vue-test-util, that is trigger. So we're going here. We need to find the button. Just to ease of development now, we're just going to use it as we'll use the CSS selector button. So we're going to do .find button trigger, and what you want to trigger. In our case, we want to trigger a click. Okay. Now we would like to know that our test is actually our description is actually being shown. So we want to show that our description is the full one. Okay. So what we do is we are going down here. We do expect the description. We need to find the description. So we're going to copy this again. Okay. So unfortunately, this test is going to fail. It's supposed to fail. The main reason for the failure is because when you can see here, we actually is not showing our text. It's still showing the ... So it's showing the snippets even if we click the button. The reason for it is behind to understand this is you have to understand the technologies behind Vue.js. So when you do a change in properties or data, Vue actually waits for everything to be wrapped up, and then it's going to implement everything together on the next tick. So you actually don't realize that in live because the ticks are very immediate. But in this case, because it was a synchronous action, you did not give the time for Vue to actually update. To do that, we need to do an await. We use our component. We use VM, that is the actual Vue instance, and then we use next tick. We're just waiting for the next tick, and this should actually fix our test. So this is very important to realize. The next tick is an important action, an important part for you. So if you change the properties, if you change something, if you want the view model to things to validate, the next tick usually is necessary in your case to actually work that out. So in our case, Now it's not actually working out, even if it clicks the button. I've clicked the right button. Oh, yes. Again, my bad in this. What I've done, I fetched the information before the next tick. So what you could actually, we can either just do this and fix it. Okay, so the test is fixed. Or we could further, further implement our test. So in our case, what we could do is we could actually get the content after the click, or we can get the content before the click. To actually see that they're different. So we could actually say after the click should match, and I think it's not dot. I need to check this. Again, this is one of those things that use too many, and I usually get. Fantastic. So it's passing now. What I've actually done in here, so this is another jest use. So if you, whichever exception you expectant you got, you can actually add a not in front of it. So if this is too much, this is not too much. If this is to be, this is not to be. To be or not to be. So we have actually enhanced our test to actually really check that before it was a different text and then it's changed. You could actually test it even differently. So in my case, I'm just looking for a p tag. But as I mentioned before, at the very start, this p tag is rendered and this one is not. So what you could do is before the click, you can make sure that this p tag is empty and then that doesn't exist. And then after the click, you can actually check that this p tag exists. So there is a different way to actually test the same things. There's no pros and cons or right or wrong. So we'll finish our test over here. And now it's time to move on to the next test that is going to be the create post. So again, if you were here last week, you remember that we had two different components. One was post and one was create post. So I'm going to open up the create post. I'm going to open up the create post spec file. Yeah. And then I'm going to put an X on both so we can start from scratch. And then we're going to analyze the create post. So the create post was a very simple component where we had a title, we had an input, a text field that input that had a view model. So that means that this was dual. I lost the word today. Two-way bindings. So that means that either we can actually we can set the post initially, so this one will be preset over here, or when changing when we change the value within here, our data will change accordingly. So we have an input field called title and an input a text area called description. Both of them actually have the data here, so they will record and they will have a view model. So this post will always be updated with the value within that. And there is the submit button. There's a button to submit that will actually run add post. Add post is not a method, but is actually an action. So it's a Vuex action. So in our case, we need to do what we call mock. Mock is interesting because mock, it's the ability for you to fake existing implementation. For in our case, if I would not do anything and I will actually run these components as it is, well, first of all, in our case, we're going to have an error because the Vuex is not defined. But the reality is that if I do that without actually mocking it, I will not just be testing this component, but I will be testing this component and Vuex. And this is what you don't want, because you want to keep your tests very small and very scoped within the unit. So in our case, we need to make sure that this one doesn't really go to Vuex and goes to a fake method, the method that we know what it does and what to expect. And that's called a mock. What we are defining is that our first test is going to be, we'll trigger an action with default object when the form is submitted. So we go back here, we can see that there is a, you probably notice I write ciao everywhere. So there are some title and description when this form loads, and we're going to actually load this. We need to make sure that when we render this component and we trigger the button, it actually is going to send this to our action. because it actually passed here. So let's see if this happens. So our first thing first is that in here, we're gonna declare our data. As I mentioned before, at the very start, we declare everything we have. We need to mount the component. And we're going to mount it with, we already got the component loaded up here. And then we're going to mount the component. Then we're going to, the next step is to actually click the button. So go up here, we need to click this button, and very simply like we did before, we do component, .find. In our case, we can just do button because we just have one button. For ease of terms, but usually we will not do that. And then we do trigger, and we can do a click. Okay, so I click the button. As you remember, we need to make sure that it's an async await, and in here we do await, and we do component.vm.nextTick. So now we have rendered our component and we click the button. So which one are our expectations? We need to expect, we want to expect that the actual value sent to the method are this one. Okay, but we've done nothing else for Vuex, so we've not actually mocked Vuex yet. So we are actually we'll have to do that right now. First thing first, Vuex, mocking Vuex is not extremely straightforward. It's not hard, but it's not straightforward. So there are two different methods of actually mocking Vuex, and I'm gonna take the information up here. Yes. So these are, as with everything with Vue, there is fantastic documentation. So these will be where you can read up about Vuex. So there are two different ways. Either you actually test Vuex by mocking it, or you can actually test Vuex by loading it up in the actually loading it up. So in our case, we're going to take the latter because we use the map, because we use the map action. So it's easier to actually load it up completely. So let's go up here. And we're going to set up the store. We need to load it up. We need to create a local version of Vue. So I'm gonna show you how to up here. We're gonna create a local version of Vue. We're gonna import Vuex and we're gonna load Vuex. And also we need to actually implement and start the store every time. Because it will be a bit silly for us to do it in every different test, because in this case we just got two, but we may have more than two. There's the ability to actually do something before and after each test. When you do some mocking, that is what we're doing right now, it is suggested to actually do this. So it is suggested to actually add anything that you have to do in every test to actually within the before each and after each. So this method is going to be run before each test and this one afterwards. So in our case, we're going to define a variable called store, and then before each, we're going to say that that store is going to be a new Vuex store. So again, we're just creating a new version of it that is our own version. And next, we're going to introduce something else. So in our, as you know, the method are nothing else than dispatch. So we're going to say dispatch, but we're not defining any variable. We're not going to go through and doing a fake method that is returning cha-cha. No, we're actually using something called jest.function. So jest.function automatically, fn function. So jest.function automatically is going to wrap it. So whatever is going to call dispatch is not going to fail, and jest is going to record all the things. So it's going to tell you when it's being called, what it's being called with, which argument has been passed, and so on and so forth. So by doing this now, we have the store available on each of the tests. What you also do, it's not actually necessary in this case because we will redeclare it here, but I like to just make sure that the store is actually cleaned up. Down here below, when we did the mounted, we need to actually do this. So we need to pass extra arguments to our component wrapper. And one is going to be the store, and the next one is going to be the local view. Okay. I didn't actually add the local view within the before each and after each because this one, it's just a local version. We are going to mount an object on it every time, so we're not actually doing anything on it that will affect it. If you want to add it there, it's fine. It's not going to add that much of extra time, but it's going to add extra resources in your code. So we're adding the store now, so we have ability to store, but how do we actually check if everything has been fine? We can use our store, our real store. So we're going to use, in here, we're going to say store that we declared, so it's available in here, dispatch. So we're going to check that this dispatch method, that is the one that you actually run when you call an action for a Vuex action. We're going to make sure that the dispatched to have been called with. So, for example, there are different methods like to have been called once, to have been called twice, to have been called, and then you can put the number on it. In our case, we're going to do with, so we can actually see what method is actually being called with. If we go back to our post, I'm expecting my action to be called with this. And also, because it's an action, the action as the name of the action we want to call. So in our case, it's going to be add post as the first parameter and then post as the second one. So we're going to say it's going to be called with add post. And then it's going to be our expected data. I'm going to save that. So it works. And we go, now it shows you that there are 2 test suites because we added the new file, and also show you that there are 4 tests passed and 1 skipped. So that's fantastic. The test is actually working. Finally, very quickly, we got the last one that we're going to do a little bit of input. So we're not just going to load this up. We're going to write something within the description. So I'm going to be very quick in this one. So I'm going to copy all of this, and we're going to change this. So if I save this, it's actually going to fail, and we want it to fail because this is usually the best way for unit tests to actually work. So you cannot actually see, but I do have a pop-up coming up on that screen when I save that tells me that it's wrong. So near you can see it's expected my new value, but actually a default description. So we're going to go back here in our test, and what we need to do is change the input field. Component.find. So this is the expected usage. We do have create post. Where is it? Description. Yes, we do have this. So we're going to use our data attribute. I'm going to remember this time to actually put the square brackets. And then we're going to do set, and I remember set value. Okay. So we're going to set value, and our value is going to be expected data dot description. So now we're setting the value. Make sure you do it before you click the button, and make sure you do it before the next tick. And then after we do that, we are actually going to save and see if it works. Okay, as you can see, our test passes, and this is fantastic. 1 minute to go. That was very good timed. There is loads to cover in unit tests, so I'm not, there's no chance for us to cover everything, but it's important that you've seen the process and actually going through. The documentation is fantastic for unit testing, guys. So very similarly with everything else with Vue, you can just go on vue-test-util. And when you go here, you got plenty of information going through. So it's showing you everything. It's showing you how to actually test with different frameworks, and then it's showing you all the API. So if I go to the wrapper, that is what we use, the component. It's showing you all the different methods and attributes that are available. So we got classes, contain, destroy. This is the one where we use the .find and next click. So there are plenty of information over here. It's visible. This is the one that we could have used actually for when we actually were looking for the p tag. So there's plenty of things there, and again, these will actually make it simpler for you to get up to speed with unit test. I can guarantee you that if you try to do unit test yourself without Vue on the behind the scene, you will find it more difficult and a bit more of a struggle, because these helpers take a long time to actually be defined, and they can actually they can take a long time and then demoralize you. With Vue, you will actually have a simple way of actually implementing it. If you do have the store, I do say that the store may actually make things a little bit more complex. So using the store may actually make your test a little bit more complex because of the dependency. So imagine if we had an action, but we also had a state. You also need to mock the state. So there are a few things that need to go in that case. There's no reason for you to get started and actually get started with a simple component. I know that there was some discussion about test coverage in the chat. I'm not 100% test coverage guy because I think there is no reason. What you need to test is the thing that really matters to you. So you should test logical app action where you should test anything that you don't want to break. You're never going to have time to do 100% coverage, and sometimes it's not even worth it because that you test that the heading is actually working and there's no action and it's a static heading, pointless. It's great because you got 99.9% coverage in the test, but it's not really necessary for you. So what you actually need to do is focus on what really matters. Because if sometimes trying to do too much, you will not be able to do any. But if you try to do just a little bit, it's good. There has been a project where we were heavily working with mixins. So we had loads of mixins, we were doing loads of logic, and where the store that was actually very, very powerful and very logical. So what we didn't do any component testing at all because we used Storybook, but we just tested the mixins and we just tested the store. By doing that, we were close enough to be sure and aware that we were able to to make modification without actually breaking anything. Of course, the front end could still break because it was not tested, but at least we found out that the risk of that was less than actually changing Vuex and things that you cannot see behind the scene. I'm going through the chat just in case there is anything, any discussion. And then, apart from me not sharing my screen, anything else was actually there. Again, we've probably covered, if you've never done unit tests, we've probably covered quite a bit, but what you have to take off is when you do a test, make sure that it's very simple. So you have one input, one output. So in our case, you do something. So we click a button, we expect this. We load it up, we expect to see this value. We click two buttons, we expect to see this. So just one. When you actually write the test up, try to divide them in the different things. So in a range, act, and assert. Try never to test things, the actual implementation within the component. So if a component is actually calling a method to do something, you shouldn't see that the method has been called, but should actually just check that the end result is actually there. And also don't go mad on testing too many things. I know that people like to do things like, diff 6, 7 expecting 1, and every time they do something, they test it again. If you have tested that the title changes when you actually pass a new property, there's no reason for you to test it over and over and over again. You've tested it already. Also, by doing that, it will help you in actually understanding the error, because I wouldn't want this to break just because I was checking the default that the description change didn't change. I want the actual file that is called the description changes when passed as a property to actually be the unit test that actually fails. Snapshot actually just does the snapshot as well. I usually I don't actually use the one from Jest. I usually like to use Storybook, and with Storybook then there is some implementation for a snapshot as well. If you are talking about the visual testing that I was working tools, actually that one will be Apply Tools, is the one that I've used in the past as well. So this one just does comparison for you and actually tells you everything that changed and everything else. And again, there is Apply Tools and Cypress integration for Vue, and there's also for Storybook and everything else. So they're very new technology, so they're very simple to get started with. And I really, it's one of those things that I suggest you to get. If you're starting to get into Vue now, I suggest you to get into unit tests. More importantly, because it makes you a better developer. It certainly did for myself, and even if, of course, I'm not the greatest, but it certainly did because it really helps you making things simple, because if they're very hard, then they're hard to test. So if you do write unit tests, you will start to make things very small method, one input, one output for everything, even if you're not doing unit tests. So very, very suggested for you to actually do that. No, apply tools I do not think is I don't think it's actually free. As you can see, there's an alternative website. Yeah, for one user it is. So yeah, so good to start. I used it in applications. So I used it in a business where it was already implemented. So I didn't actually know about the pricing, but yeah, it's actually free, as it's seen from here. So Cypress is free as well. So greatly suggest you to use those tools, but also the unit test, because it helps you to test what you cannot see. That is the most important. I want to thank everyone that joined here. It has been, there's loads to cover. So when I do this session, it's very hard when you go through because there's too much that I want to cover. But I thank you everyone to be here. Likely today, nothing went too wrong. And I really hope you to see next week. Next week, we're going to deploy our application on AWS using Amplify. So that's something that I thought was extremely hard. It is not. So please join in, because Amplify is free for very personal use. So if you don't do anything huge, it will allow you to do continuous integration. It will allow you to actually have an HTTPS, so you can actually test PWAs. It will allow you to do so many more things. So please join in next week. And thank you so much for coming around.